when I was a youth, just about every weekend, weather permitting, I tried to get out and fly model aircraft. That was my hobby, and I did that for over a decade. Of course, that was back in the day before all these FAA regulations. So we were flying nitro airplanes. Nitro was king. Eventually got into gasoline-powered models, but these models weighed several pounds, 7, 8, 9, up to 12 pounds. I think my heaviest model was. So there were no regulations back then. You were to fly safe. You had to stay below 400 feet and not fly near airports with manned aviation. That was pretty straightforward, easy to comprehend, easy to comply with. But then people started buying these drones that could fly themselves, basically, and, well, they started getting into trouble. They started flying places they really ought not fly because they weren't part of the hobby. Unfortunately, the Federal Aviation Administration decided that they were going to regulate the hobby because of these non-hobbyist flying drones. Most of you watching the video probably are already aware of that. But the fact of the matter is, I gave up flying model aircraft when I started flying manned aviation and doing firearms and other activities. I just kind of gave up flying models. I kind of grew out of it, if you will. But recently I decided I wanted to get back into it. And I said, all right, well, there are all these regulations in place now. And I want to see if I can maybe build an aircraft that is compliant with the regulations, but where I don't have to have a remote ID module. If you're interested in knowing about remote ID, I did a video about that and why I think it's kind of stupid and why, or that is to say, what solution I think would be better. And I'll have a link to that video in the description and in a pinned comment, and of course you can watch that after this video if you're interested. But basically, if you build an aircraft that's under 250 grams, you don't have to have remote ID. So, when I set out on this little project, I decided to buy a model that I figured I might be able to build under 250 grams. Now, the approximate flying weight they say on this is 10 ounces, which is above 250 grams, but I figured I know what I'm doing. I can probably buy the right components and build the aircraft light enough that, well, I'll fall under that 250 gram category. Well, I'm not so sure now. I'm not so sure I'm actually going to be able to pull that off. I am going to try, but truth be told, this model was a little heavier than I thought it was going to be, and the electronics I have, although I have gone with some lightweight stuff, they're going to come pretty close to 250 grams before even covering the airframe. So I'm not sure that I am going to be able to pull it off. I will say this, if I have to choose between putting a remote ID module on this particular model so that I can legally fly it on YouTube, and between that and looking cool, I'll put the module on there. I don't want the airplane to look stupid. So I'm not going to just build a plain Jane airplane with nothing on it just to get away with the weight. I am going to make it look cool. So I am going to try for getting below 250 grams, but I am not going to do so at the cost of making the airplane look halfway decent. The airplane I'm building, by the way, is a mini Ugly Stick. This was produced by 3DRC, and this is interesting. It's the first 3D printed airframe that I've dealt with. What I'm doing right now is just going through and cleaning stuff up, try to reduce a little bit of the excess weight, although there's really not much weight to it. This stuff is pretty light. It's not a true Ugly Stick. As you can see, that's a high lift airfoil. Ugly Sticks, as far as I'm aware, traditionally had a symmetrical airfoil, so they were aerobatic capable. You can do aerobatics as well with a high lift wing, but you're just not going to be able to fly inverted quite so easily. So this is not a true Ugly Stick. I think I'm going to refer to this as the Stole Stick. Like I said, I'm going to try to keep it very light If it's light and it's got a high lift wing, it should be STOL capable. So right now I'm just going to go through, I'm going to start cleaning up some of these parts. I am going to sand some of the surfaces that are going to be glued together. So these just basically glue together with CA. I don't have any CA on me that's any good. I do have super glue, and to be honest, super glue and hobby grade CA, there's not a whole lot of difference between the two. So I'm just going to build this with super glue. Might be a little too early to call anything on this model, but there have been some slight issues here. I've just started off with the gear because I figured that would be easy to go ahead and assemble. This wheel went on fine. This one did not. I had to take a drill bit and wallow out the hole for the center of the hub there. Hopefully this stuff stands up fairly well. I've never worked with 3D printed parts before, and supposedly they've come a long way from where they started. We'll see. I did a little light sanding to the fuselage parts where they're going to come together. It is important to stay away from these holes here in the center. I say that and then drop a very thin line right across them. Those are where your push rods are going to go through for your tail surfaces. So you don't want to have those get glued up. I'm going to try and keep these nice and straight and push these two pieces together. Well, that's some thin glue. It should have dried pretty quick. Might have to let this set up for a bit before I try picking it up. Now you're supposed to be able to just put these on a flat surface. Apparently my table, although it is flat, is not quite flat enough. So I'm going to put a clamp here on the fuselage. Well, I'm afraid that pressure might be too much for the structure. I'm basically just stuck here holding this till the glue dries. I might as well add a bead here on the outside. Hopefully that cures up quickly enough here I don't have to hold it too much longer. I'm beginning to think it's not my table that's the fault. I believe this airframe is not perfectly flat on the bottom like it is advertised to be, so possibly an error with the 3D print. Not entirely sure, but what I'm going to do is just set this off camera on the nose and hopefully it'll stay standing and glue that way. And while that's gluing up, yeah, I think that will stay, I'll go ahead and start working on the wings. I'm just going to sand these surfaces a little bit and then glue the wing sections together. At least the bottom of the wings do seem to be flat. That's going together nicely. I didn't catch it on camera. The fuselage parts have finally dried enough where they're not coming apart, but I did go ahead and glue the block in for the wing screw. So that's together. As you can see, I have also added clamps to the back edge of the, the trailing edge of the wings to glue those segments together. They were kind of pulling apart, but so far everything is going together reasonably well. I'm not actually ready to install the landing gear, obviously, but I just wanted to point something out. I did have to clean up the gap where the landing gear is installed, that slot that the gear slides into, and even after having cleaned it up, the quality control just doesn't seem to be there. The tolerances are so tight I can't get the tab into the fuselage. So what I think I'm going to do is just sand the ears off on each side a little bit, see if I can get it in there. So I did eventually end up getting that to slide in. However, I had to remove so much excess material. I didn't actually use sandpaper, but I used a file. So the wing has finished gluing up at this point. I do need to add a little tab here. That's the tab. to the leading edge of the wing, and that tab is supposed to slide into this slot right here on the fuselage to lock the front of the leading edge of the wing to the front of the fuselage. However, again, tolerances are rather tight. This is not sliding into that hole, so I'm going to have to do quite a bit of trimming on this part before I glue it to the wing. So apparently it's amateur hour. I forgot to record once again. I did get that tab to where it will fit into that slot. I just glued it on the wing, and I thought I was recording all that. Unfortunately, I did not. What I was saying, though, is with the quality control issues that I've seen, unless you've got the tools and the patience to fix the issues, I'm not sure that this would be a very good first build for somebody. Obviously, coming in larger sections, like these wings were already put together, it's just gluing 3 sections of wing together rather than having to do individual ribs and spars. It's less work, so from that aspect maybe a little bit easier than a traditional balsa build. However, it's very much an issue of tolerances not being there. So unless you're prepared to work with that, this one might not be the best build for you. So I've gone about as far as I can right now with gluing stuff together. I'm going to start covering some of the parts, and as far as covering goes, this is what was supplied with the airframe. Now these ugly sticks, of course, are based on World War I German aircraft, loosely based, I should say. This was going to be orange in color, and then of course it was going to have white and black trim and the iron crosses and all that. I'm not actually going to do that particular paint scheme for this airplane, and I'm not going to use all of this material. This is not a typical iron-on covering. This is a vinyl stick-on type covering. I don't think it looks all that great, to be honest, once it's installed on the airplane. I've seen some pictures. I am going to use some of it for trim, but what I'm planning to actually cover the majority of the airframe with is this. This is a traditional iron-on covering film. I think it's going to be considerably lighter. There is some prep work that I need to do to the airframe, though. I'm going to be using some of this cover glue. I've never actually used any of this in the past. I've always traditionally used balsa airframes, so covering balsa is pretty easy with iron-on. You can use this on balsa to help adhesion. However, here what I'm going to do is just apply it to the edges. So all of the edges of any surface that I'm doing, I think I'll start with the horizontal stabilizer. I'll do all the edges with the glue, let that dry, and then once the glue is dried, what this stuff does is it helps your fabric covering stick better. So I'm just going to apply it to the edges, iron it onto the edges, and then heat the fabric up with I can't think of the word today. Not a hair dryer, but a heat gun. And hopefully that'll tighten up like a drum and it'll look pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with that.